The clock on Richardson Technologies' main building showed 9:45 p.m. as Marcus Richardson walked out of his office. His designer shoes clicked against the polished floor of the parking garage as he headed toward his bright red Ferrari. The car wasn't just a way to show off his wealth. It was a reminder of how far he'd come from the small apartment he grew up in with his mother. Marcus had just finished another successful board meeting. His company's latest software update was going to change the way people used their phones, and the board members couldn't have been happier. At 45 years old, he had built his company from nothing into a $50 billion tech giant. Today, he was one of the few black billionaires in America, and tomorrow he was going to announce something big that would help his community. The Ferrari's engine purred to life as Marcus settled into the leather seat. He checked his phone. 3 missed calls from the police commissioner about tomorrow's announcement. "I'll call him when I get home," Marcus thought, putting his phone on silent. He needed some quiet time to think. The streets of downtown Seattle were peaceful at this hour. The usual traffic had died down, and the city lights reflected off the wet pavement from an earlier rain. Marcus drove carefully, keeping to the speed limit. He'd learned long ago that someone who looked like him couldn't risk even small mistakes on the road. At a red light, Marcus loosened his tie and thought about tomorrow's press conference. The $50 million donation to the police department's community programs was going to surprise a lot of people. Some might even be angry about it. But Marcus believed in fixing problems from the inside, working with people instead of against them. The light turned green, and Marcus drove on. Everything was normal until he saw the blue and red lights flashing in his rearview mirror. His heart sank, but he stayed calm. He'd been through this before, even after becoming successful. Marcus turned on his interior lights and pulled over smoothly, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel. A police officer approached, his flashlight beam almost blinding in the side mirror. Marcus could see the officer's name tag in the bright light. Cooper. Officer Cooper's hand was resting near his gun, something that didn't go unnoticed by Marcus. "License and registration," Officer Cooper demanded, not even bothering to say why he pulled Marcus over. His tone was harsh, dismissive. "Of course, officer," Marcus replied calmly. "My registration is in the glove compartment, and my license is in my wallet. Would you like me to get them now?" The officer's response surprised him. "Step out of the vehicle." Cooper suddenly shouted, his hand now gripping his gun. Marcus's mind raced, but his face stayed calm. This wasn't his first time dealing with prejudice, but it was perhaps the most dangerous. He knew that one wrong move, one angry word, could end badly. The irony wasn't lost on him. Tomorrow he was supposed to donate millions to help improve police-community relations, but tonight he was living exactly the kind of situation he was trying to fix. "Officer, I'm happy to step out, but I'd like to know why I'm being stopped," Marcus said evenly, his hand still visible on the wheel. He noticed people on the sidewalk had stopped to watch. Some had their phones out, recording. "I said get out of the car. Now." Officer Cooper's voice grew louder, more aggressive. The situation was escalating quickly, and Marcus could see this wasn't going to be a normal traffic stop. As Marcus carefully reached for his seatbelt, moving slowly to avoid any misunderstandings, his phone lit up again. The police commissioner was calling for the 4th time. But Officer Cooper couldn't see the screen from where he stood, and Marcus knew better than to reach for the phone now. Marcus took a deep breath and prepared to step out of his Ferrari. In his mind, he could hear his mother's voice from years ago. "Sometimes, son, you have to be twice as calm to be seen as half as threatening." As he opened the car door, Marcus had no idea that this traffic stop was about to become national news, and that everything was about to change, not just for him, but for Officer Cooper too. The cool night air hit Marcus's face as he stepped out of his Ferrari. The small crowd of onlookers had grown larger, their phone cameras creating a sea of tiny lights in the darkness. Officer Cooper stood rigid, his hand still on his weapon, as Marcus raised his hand slightly to show he wasn't a threat. "Turn around and put your hands on the car," Cooper barked, his voice echoing off the nearby buildings. Marcus could hear whispers from the crowd, could feel their eyes on him. He was used to people watching him, but usually it was during business presentations or TV interviews. Not like this. "Officer Cooper," Marcus said calmly, following the instructions, "I'm Marcus Richardson, CEO of Richardson Technologies. If you check my ID, you'll see." "I don't care who you say you are." Cooper cut him off, roughly grabbing Marcus's wrists and slapping handcuffs on them. The cold metal bit into Marcus's skin, but he kept his face neutral. 20 years of handling tough business negotiations had taught him how to stay composed under pressure. Among the growing crowd, a woman in a blue blazer pushed forward. Marcus recognized her, Sarah Chen from Channel 7 News. She had interviewed him last month about his company's new healthcare initiative. Sarah pulled out her press badge and started live streaming on her phone. "Officer, I can confirm that this is Marcus Richardson," Sarah called out. "He's one of Seattle's most prominent business leaders. What's the reason for this arrest?" Cooper's face reddened, but he ignored her question. Instead, he started roughly patting Marcus down, checking for weapons that weren't there. Marcus's expensive suit jacket bunched up awkwardly around the handcuffs, and his phone kept buzzing in his pocket. Probably the police commissioner calling again. "Sir, my phone has been ringing," Marcus said quietly. "It's likely the police commissioner. We have an important meeting tomorrow morning about." "Stop talking." Cooper snapped, but Marcus could hear a slight tremor in his voice now. The mention of the police commissioner had clearly rattled him. More cars were slowing down to watch the scene. Some people were calling out in anger, while others were frantically typing on their phones. Marcus knew this would be all over social media within minutes. His PR team would have a busy night ahead. "My wallet is in my left pocket," Marcus continued calmly, despite Cooper's order for silence. "My ID and business cards are there. You'll also find a special security clearance card for tomorrow's police department ceremony." Cooper hesitated for a moment, then reached into Marcus's pocket. As he pulled out the wallet, several platinum credit cards and Marcus's police department VIP pass fell to the ground. The officer stared at the official police department logo on the pass, his hand starting to shake slightly. Sarah Chen's livestream had now caught the attention of her news station. A Channel 7 van pulled up, its bright lights illuminating the scene like a stage. Marcus could hear the reporter's professional voice. "We're live downtown, where tech billionaire Marcus Richardson appears to have been handcuffed during a traffic stop. Mr. Richardson is scheduled to make a major announcement tomorrow morning at police headquarters." Officer Cooper's radio crackled to life. "Unit 247, please respond. We have reports of a possible situation involving Marcus Richardson." The crowd had swelled to nearly 50 people now. Someone started chanting, "Let him go." Others joined in. Marcus could see the fear creeping into Cooper's eyes as the situation spiraled beyond his control. Suddenly, a black SUV with police lights screeched to a halt nearby. The police commissioner himself stepped out, his face a mask of shock and anger as he took in the scene. One of the city's most prominent citizens handcuffed beside his Ferrari, a growing crowd of angry onlookers, and news cameras capturing every moment. Marcus kept his eyes forward, still leaning against his car. In a few hours, he was supposed to announce a massive donation to help improve police-community relations. The irony of his current situation wasn't lost on him. But as he stood there, Marcus realized this moment could become something more than just another story of prejudice. It could become a turning point, if he handled it right. The commissioner was walking toward them now, his face grim. Officer Cooper stood frozen, still holding Marcus's wallet, as his boss approached. The night was about to take another dramatic turn, and everyone present could feel it. Police Commissioner David Wells moved through the crowd like a ship cutting through rough waters. His usual friendly smile was replaced by a stern frown as he approached Officer Cooper and the handcuffed Marcus Richardson. The news cameras followed his every move, their bright lights making the scene look like a movie set. "What in God's name is going on here?" Commissioner Wells demanded, his deep voice carrying across the now quiet street. The crowd had stopped their chanting to watch what would happen next. Officer Cooper stood at attention, but his face had gone pale. "Sir, I was conducting a routine traffic stop and—" "A routine traffic stop?" Sarah Chen interrupted from behind her camera phone. "Officer Cooper hasn't even stated why he pulled Mr. Richardson over, and he immediately put him in handcuffs." The commissioner turned to Marcus, who was still calmly leaning against his Ferrari. "Marcus, I've been trying to reach you about tomorrow's ceremony. I certainly didn't expect to find you like this." He shook his head in disbelief. "My phone's been ringing, Commissioner," Marcus replied evenly, "but Officer Cooper didn't want me to answer it." Despite the handcuffs, Marcus maintained his dignity, speaking in the same measured tone he used in board meetings. More news vans were arriving now. The story was spreading fast. People in the crowd were reading news alerts on their phones about the incident. Someone shouted, "That's the guy who's giving millions to the police department." Officer Cooper's eyes widened at this information. His hand, still holding Marcus's wallet, began to tremble visibly. "Sir, I didn't know who he was. I was just following protocol." "Protocol?" Commissioner Wells's voice was sharp. "Show me where our protocol says to handcuff a cooperative citizen without cause." He turned to Marcus again. "Son, how long have you been standing here in cuffs?" Before Marcus could answer, his phone started buzzing again. This time it was his company's PR director, probably already dealing with the flood of media inquiries. Sarah Chen's livestream had over 50,000 viewers now, and the numbers were climbing fast. About 15 minutes, Marcus answered the commissioner's question, "Though it feels longer in these handcuffs." He managed a small smile, showing remarkable composure despite the situation. The commissioner's face darkened. "Remove those handcuffs immediately, Cooper." His voice was low but filled with authority. As Officer Cooper fumbled with the handcuff keys, more police cars arrived. Several high-ranking officers stepped out, looking confused and concerned at the scene before them. They had all been part of tomorrow's planned ceremony preparations. Finally free from the handcuffs, Marcus straightened his expensive suit jacket and rubbed his wrists. The crowd burst into applause, but Marcus raised his hands for quiet. Even now, he was thinking about how to turn this terrible situation into something positive. "Commissioner," Marcus said, loud enough for the cameras to pick up, "I still believe in what we're going to announce tomorrow. Maybe tonight's incident makes it even more important." Sarah Chen pushed forward with her microphone. "Mr. Richardson, will you be pressing charges against Officer Cooper and the department?" The crowd grew quiet again, waiting for his answer. Officer Cooper looked like he might pass out. His career, his future, everything hung on what this wrongfully arrested billionaire might say next. Marcus looked at the young officer, seeing not just the man who had humiliated him, but someone who could become part of the solution. He remembered his mother's words about change. Sometimes the best way to fix a broken system is to work with the people who broke it. "No charges," Marcus announced clearly. The crowd murmured in surprise. "But I do have a proposal for Officer Cooper and the department." He turned to face the cameras directly now, his voice taking on the same powerful tone he used when announcing new technology that would change the world. The commissioner stepped closer, intrigued. Officer Cooper stared at Marcus with a mixture of fear and confusion. The gathered crowd leaned in to hear what this wrongfully arrested billionaire would say next. None of them knew it yet, but Marcus Richardson was about to turn this humiliating incident into something that would change police departments across the country. Marcus Richardson stood tall under the bright news cameras, his presence commanding attention just as it did in corporate boardrooms. The crowd had grown to over 100 people now, all waiting to hear what he would say. Even the traffic had stopped completely, creating an impromptu stage on the downtown street. "Tomorrow morning," Marcus began, his voice clear and strong, "I was going to announce a $50 million donation to the Seattle Police Department." He paused as gasps rippled through the crowd. Officer Cooper's face showed complete shock. "This money," Marcus continued, "was meant to create new training programs and community outreach initiatives. Programs that would help prevent exactly what happened here tonight." He straightened his tie, now looking directly at Officer Cooper. Sarah Chen pushed her microphone closer. "Mr. Richardson, are you saying you'll withdraw the donation after tonight's incident?" The commissioner held his breath. This donation was supposed to be his department's biggest victory in years. Now it might slip away because of one officer's prejudice. Marcus smiled slightly. "No, Sarah, I'm not withdrawing anything. In fact, I'm doubling it." This announcement caused even more surprise than the first. Camera flashes exploded around him as photographers captured the moment. "But," Marcus raised his hand for silence, "I have new conditions." He turned to Officer Cooper, who was still standing nervously nearby. "Officer Cooper, you're going to help design these new programs." Cooper's mouth fell open. "Sir, I don't understand," he stammered. "It's simple," Marcus explained, his voice carrying across the now silent street. "You just showed everyone exactly what needs to change. Instead of firing you or pressing charges, I want you to work with my company's diversity team. You'll help create training programs that prevent other officers from making the same mistakes." The commissioner stepped forward. "Marcus, are you sure about this?" "Completely sure," Marcus nodded. "Real change doesn't come from punishment alone. It comes from understanding and education." He pulled out his phone, which had finally stopped buzzing, and opened his calendar. "Starting next week, Officer Cooper will spend half his shifts at the Richardson Technologies offices, working with our team." The crowd started murmuring again. Some people looked confused, others impressed. Sarah Chen was rapidly typing on her phone, probably updating her news story. This was turning into something much bigger than a wrongful arrest. "Mr. Richardson," Officer Cooper spoke up, his voice shaky but determined. "Why would you trust me with this, after what I did?" Marcus walked over to Cooper, placing a hand on his shoulder. The cameras went crazy capturing this moment. Because, Officer Cooper, sometimes the best teachers are the ones who learned from their mistakes. You're going to help us show other officers how to do better. Tears formed in Cooper's eyes. The tough, aggressive officer from earlier was gone, replaced by a man who suddenly understood the weight of his actions and the unexpected grace being shown to him. The commissioner watched all this with growing amazement. He had known Marcus Richardson was a brilliant businessman, but this move showed a level of leadership he hadn't expected. Instead of destroying Cooper's career, Marcus was using this incident to create real change. "We'll start tomorrow," Marcus announced to the cameras. "Instead of just a simple donation announcement, we'll reveal our new enhanced community relations and training initiative. Officer Cooper will be introduced as our first police department liaison." Sarah Chen raised her hand. "What about tonight's incident? Will there be any official record?" "Oh, there will be a record," Marcus smiled. "We're going to use the body cam footage in our training videos, with Officer Cooper's permission, of course." He looked at Cooper, who nodded slowly, still processing everything. The crowd began to applaud, but this time it wasn't just for Marcus being released. They were clapping for something bigger, a moment when anger and justice transformed into hope and change. Marcus looked at his watch. It was almost midnight. "Commissioner, I believe we have a press conference to prepare for." "And Officer Cooper," he turned to the still stunned policeman, "I expect to see you in my office at 9 a.m. sharp. We have work to do." As the crowd began to disperse and the news teams prepared their late-night reports, no one doubted that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. What had started as another story of racial profiling had somehow become a masterclass in leadership and transformation. The next morning, the Richardson Technologies lobby was buzzing with activity. News vans lined the street outside, and reporters huddled near the entrance, waiting for the press conference to begin. Inside, Marcus Richardson sat in his office, reviewing his speech one last time while watching the morning news coverage of last night's incident. In a stunning turn of events, the TV anchor was saying, "What could have been another tragic example of racial profiling has instead become a story of transformation." Tech billionaire Marcus Richardson's response to his wrongful arrest has captured the nation's attention. A knock on his office door interrupted Marcus's thoughts. His assistant poked her head in. "Mr. Richardson, Officer Cooper is here. He's early." Marcus checked his watch. 8:45 a.m. Sent him in, Janet. He stood up, straightening his fresh suit. Unlike last night's wrinkled one, this suit hadn't been crushed by handcuffs. Officer Cooper entered the office looking very different from the aggressive policeman of the previous night. He wore his formal uniform, but his shoulders were slumped, and his eyes showed signs of a sleepless night. In his hands, he clutched a folder. "Good morning, Officer Cooper," Marcus said warmly, gesturing to a chair. "You're early." "Yes, sir," Cooper replied, sitting down carefully. I spent all night writing this." He opened the folder and pulled out several handwritten pages. "It's my resignation letter." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "I don't remember asking for your resignation." "But sir, after what I did." Cooper's voice cracked slightly. "The whole country has seen the video now. My own kids saw it on TikTok this morning. I can't show my face at the precinct." Marcus walked around his desk and sat in the chair next to Cooper, not across from him. It was a small gesture, but an important one. "Officer Cooper, do you know why I became successful in technology?" Cooper looked confused by the question. "Because you're smart, sir." Because I learned to see problems as opportunities, Marcus corrected him. Last night, you showed everyone exactly what needs to change in police departments across America. Now you have the chance to help fix it. He picked up Cooper's resignation letter and smoothly tore it in half. The officer watched, mouth open in surprise. But the other officers, Cooper started. We'll learn from this, Marcus finished. Look at this. He turned his computer screen to show Cooper his email inbox. I've received messages from police departments in 12 different states asking about our new training program, the one you're going to help design. A knock on the door interrupted them. Commissioner Wells entered, followed by Sarah Chen and her camera crew. It's time, the commissioner said. The press conference starts in 10 minutes. Marcus stood up. Officer Cooper, are you ready to face those cameras again? This time as part of the solution? Cooper straightened his uniform and stood up. His face showed fear, but also determination. Yes, sir, I won't let you down. As they walked toward the conference room, they could hear the buzz of hundreds of voices. It seemed like every news outlet in the country had sent someone to cover this story. Remember, Marcus said quietly to Cooper, when they ask about last night, be honest. Tell them what you learned. Show them change is possible. They paused at the conference room doors. Inside, Marcus could see his PR team setting up the podium, arranging the giant check for $100 million. Twice the original donation amount he'd promised. Mr. Richardson, Cooper said suddenly, my daughter asked me this morning why you didn't have me fired. She's 12. I didn't know what to tell her. Marcus smiled. Tell her that sometimes the best way to fix a broken system is to work with the people who know exactly where it's broken. He straightened Cooper's badge. You're going to help a lot of officers learn to do better, starting today. The doors opened, and camera flashes exploded around them. As they walked to the podium together, the wrongly arrested billionaire and the officer who arrested him, reporters started shouting questions. But Marcus raised his hand for silence, just as he had the night before. This wasn't just a press conference announcing a donation anymore. It was the beginning of real change, and everyone in that room could feel it. The Richardson Technologies conference room had never been so crowded. Journalists packed every available space, their cameras focused on the podium where Marcus Richardson stood with Officer Cooper and Commissioner Wells. The giant check for $100 million stood on an easel beside them, catching the light from dozens of camera flashes. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began, his voice strong and clear. Last night, something unexpected happened on our city streets. He gestured to Officer Cooper, who stood straight but nervous in his uniform. What could have been another tragic headline has instead become an opportunity for real change. Sarah Chen, now sitting in the front row, raised her hand first. Mr. Richardson, your video has been viewed over 10 million times since last night. Many people are calling for Officer Cooper's badge. Why are you defending him? The room grew quiet. Officer Cooper swallowed hard, but Marcus just smiled. I'm not defending his actions, Marcus replied. I'm investing in his transformation. Officer Cooper, would you like to share your thoughts? Cooper stepped up to the microphone, his hands shaking slightly. The camera flashes intensified. Last night, he began, his voice trembling but growing stronger. I made assumptions based on what I saw, a black man in an expensive car. I didn't see Marcus Richardson, the CEO. I didn't see a community leader. I saw what my biases wanted me to see. A murmur ran through the crowd. No one had expected such honest admission from a police officer. Commissioner Wells nodded encouragingly. But Mr. Richardson, Cooper continued, showed me something too. He showed me that change is possible, but only if we're brave enough to admit our mistakes and learn from them. Another reporter stood up. Officer Cooper, your body cam footage has gone viral. How does it feel to watch yourself in that video? Cooper took a deep breath. Honestly, I couldn't sleep last night after watching it. I saw myself becoming exactly what people fear about police officers. But today, you looked at Marcus. Today I have a chance to help make sure other officers don't make the same mistakes. Marcus stepped back to the microphone. The Enhanced Community Relations and Training Initiative isn't just about money. It's about creating real change from within. Officer Cooper will work directly with our diversity team to develop new training programs. His experience, both his mistake and his willingness to learn from it, will be valuable teaching tools. Commissioner Wells took his turn at the podium. This program will revolutionize how we train our officers. The body cam footage from last night, with Officer Cooper's permission, will become part of our training curriculum. Sometimes the best lessons come from our hardest moments. The questions continued for another hour. Reporters wanted to know every detail about the new program, about Cooper's role, about Marcus's decision to double the donation. Through it all, Marcus noticed Cooper standing straighter, speaking more confidently. The scared officer from early that morning was being replaced by someone who understood his new purpose. As the press conference wound down, a young reporter asked the question everyone had been wondering. "Mr. Richardson, do you forgive Officer Cooper?" The room fell silent again. Marcus looked at Cooper for a moment before answering. Forgiveness isn't just about saying it's okay. It's about creating change. Officer Cooper is willing to become part of that change. That's worth more than any apology. After the last question, as the reporters began packing up their equipment, Cooper's phone buzzed. He checked it and tears welled up in his eyes. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked quietly. Cooper showed him the phone screen. It was a text from his 12-year-old daughter. "Dad, I saw you on TV. I'm proud of you for telling the truth and trying to fix things. Love you." Marcus patted Cooper's shoulder. That's what real change looks like. One person, one family, one department at a time. As they walked out of the conference room, Marcus's assistant handed him a stack of messages. Police departments from across the country wanted to know more about the program. Major companies were calling to add their own donations to the initiative. What had started as a routine traffic stop was growing into a national movement. "Ready to get to work?" Marcus asked Cooper. Cooper straightened his uniform one more time. "Yes, sir. Where do we start?" "We start," Marcus said, heading toward the elevator, "by showing everyone that last night wasn't the end of a story. It was just the beginning." 3 months had passed since the night of the traffic stop. The conference room at Richardson Technologies looked very different now. Instead of reporters with cameras, it was filled with police officers from across the country, all watching intently as Officer James Cooper stood at the front of the room. "This is me," Cooper said, pointing to the screen behind him where his body camera footage played. "This is what unconscious bias looks like in action." The room was silent as they watched him handcuffing Marcus Richardson that night. "And this," he continued, changing the slide to show the press conference, "is what change looks like." Marcus watched from the back of the room, smiling slightly. In the past 3 months, Cooper had gone from a nervous, guilt-ridden officer to a confident trainer. He spoke at every session, sharing his story with brutal honesty that made other officers listen. "Mr. Richardson could have ended my career that night," Cooper told the group. "Instead, he showed me how to become part of the solution. Now, I'm here to help you do the same." Sarah Chen sat in the corner, taking notes. She had been following the program's progress since day one, and her reports had helped spread the word nationwide. When she raised her hand, Cooper nodded to her. "Officer Cooper," she asked, "can you tell us about the program's results so far?" Cooper looked at Marcus, who stepped forward to join him. "In 3 months," Marcus began, "we've trained over 500 officers. Complaints about racial profiling have dropped by 40% in departments that have completed our program. But the numbers don't tell the whole story," Cooper added. "Last week, one of our trained officers stopped a young black man in an expensive car. Instead of making assumptions, he remembered my story. Turns out the driver was a surgeon heading to an emergency operation. The officer gave him an escort to the hospital." The room burst into applause. Marcus noticed several officers wiping tears from their eyes. This wasn't just sensitivity training, it was real stories, real changes, real impact. After the session, Marcus's assistant brought in some surprising news. "Sir, the White House called. They want you and Officer Cooper to present your program to a National Police Reform Committee." Cooper, who was packing up his presentation materials, nearly dropped his laptop. "The White House? Are you serious?" Marcus grinned. "Looks like we're going to need a bigger conference room." Later that afternoon, they sat in Marcus's office, reviewing the program's expansion plans. Police departments from Canada and the United Kingdom had reached out, wanting to implement similar training. Major corporations were calling too, asking about adapting the program for their own diversity initiatives. "Did you know this would happen?" Cooper asked, looking at the world map on the wall where pins marked every city that had requested the training. That night, when you made your decision, did you see all this coming? Marcus leaned back in his chair. I saw an opportunity to create change. The size of that change, that came from people like you, James. People willing to admit their mistakes and work to fix them. Cooper's phone buzzed. Another text from his daughter. She had become one of the program's biggest supporters, even starting a social justice club at her school. She's presenting our story at a school assembly next week, Cooper said proudly, 12 years old and already teaching others about bias. There was a knock at the door. Commissioner Wells entered, carrying a thick report. Gentlemen, you need to see these numbers. Every department that's completed your training is showing improved community relations. Other cities are noticing. This could change policing across the country. Marcus stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the Seattle skyline. 3 months ago, he had stood handcuffed on a street below. Now he was watching his vision of change spread across the nation. You know what the best part is? Cooper said, joining him at the window. Every officer who goes through this training has to watch my body camera video. My biggest mistake became our best teaching tool. Marcus turned to him. Ready for the White House? Cooper straightened his tie. He wore a suit now when he wasn't in uniform, looking every bit the professional trainer he'd become. Ready, but this time, I'm driving. They both laughed, remembering how far they'd come from that night 3 months ago. Outside Marcus's office, the training session was breaking up. Dozens of officers heading back to their departments with new perspectives and tools for change. One traffic stop, Marcus mused, watching them leave. Sometimes that's all it takes to start a revolution. 1 year had passed since that fateful night of the traffic stop. The East Room of the White House was packed with people, police chiefs, community leaders, reporters, and politicians. At the podium stood Marcus Richardson and James Cooper, no longer just a CEO and a police officer, but partners in one of the most successful police reform programs in history. A year ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying across the historic room. I stood handcuffed beside my Ferrari. A slight murmur of laughter rippled through the crowd. Today, I stand before you with proof that one moment of injustice can spark a movement of change. The president sat in the front row, nodding as Marcus spoke. Behind him, a large screen showed statistics from the past year. Over 10,000 officers trained, complaints down by 60%, community satisfaction up in every participating city. James Cooper stepped up to the microphone next. Gone was the nervous officer from a year ago. He now moved with the confidence of someone who had found his true calling. That night, he said, I was the problem. Today, I'm part of the solution, and I'm not alone. He gestured to the side of the room, where 50 police officers stood in their dress uniforms. Each one had completed the program and become a trainer themselves, spreading the message of change across the country. Our program doesn't just teach officers what not to do, Cooper continued. It shows them what to do instead. Every graduate of our program has a story like mine, a moment when they chose understanding over assumption, communication over confrontation. Sarah Chen, now a national news anchor, raised her hand. Officer Cooper, your body camera video has been viewed over 50 million times. It's taught in police academies across the world. How does that feel? Cooper smiled. My daughter asked me the same question this morning. I told her it feels like turning poison into medicine. My worst moment as a police officer became a tool for preventing others from making the same mistake. Marcus returned to the podium. Today, we're announcing the next phase of our initiative. He paused as excited whispers filled the room. Thanks to support from major corporations and police departments worldwide, we're establishing the Richardson Cooper Institute for Police Reform. This permanent training center will ensure that the changes we started continue for generations to come. The president stood up to shake their hands as the room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment when a black billionaire and the white police officer who once wrongfully arrested him stood together at the White House, united in their mission for change. After the ceremony, Marcus and Cooper walked through the White House gardens, taking a quiet moment away from the crowds. Remember when you tore up my resignation letter? Cooper asked, looking at the rose bushes. I thought my life was over that morning. Marcus chuckled. And now you're teaching at Harvard's law school part-time, training police chiefs, and your daughter's running for student body president on a social justice platform. She's using our story in her campaign speech, Cooper said proudly. Says if her dad could learn and change, anyone can. They stopped at a bench, sitting down to enjoy the peaceful garden. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Cooper a photo, his old Ferrari parked next to a police car. The museum display is ready, Marcus said. Both vehicles would be part of a permanent exhibition about their story at the new institute. Think anyone will believe this all started with a traffic stop? They'll believe it, Cooper replied, because we got the video to prove it. But more importantly, we've got thousands of officers out there proving that change is possible. As they walked back inside, they passed a group of young police cadets touring the White House. The cadets immediately recognized them. Cooper's body camera video was required watching at every police academy now. Sir, one young cadet called out to Cooper, your story inspired me to become an officer. I want to be part of the change. Cooper looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. Then let me tell you what I learned that night. Cooper began, gathering the cadets around. It's a story about mistakes, forgiveness, and the power of choosing to be better. Marcus watched as Cooper shared their story once again. In the year since that night, they had told it hundreds of times, but it never got old, because each telling meant another chance for change, another opportunity to transform a potential problem into a solution. The sun was setting over Washington, D.C. as they finally left the White House. Their cars, no longer a Ferrari and a police cruiser, but two normal vehicles, were parked side by side. Same time tomorrow? Cooper asked, reaching for his keys. Same time tomorrow, Marcus confirmed. We've still got work to do. And they did, because even after a year of success, even after changing thousands of lives, they knew their story wasn't really over. It was just beginning to inspire the next chapter of change in America.